Alright, section 1.2 is going to cover evaluating powers, order of operations, evaluating algebraic expressions, and lastly simplifying expressions by combining like terms. So in the first part, before we actually start to evaluate powers, we're going to go over a little bit of the vocabulary. What is a power? So here's an example. Let's say 9, and then we've got a little 3 there. Both of these pieces together are going to represent your power. Your 3, in this case, is your exponent, and your 9 is your base. Your exponent tells you how many times you're going to multiply your base. Alright, so in this case, 9 to the third power, it would be 9 times 9 times 9. Alright, we're not going to spend too much time on this. I really want to focus on the negative aspect when using powers. A lot of students make mistakes when there is a base that's a negative. So, let's take a look at the first scenario. Alright, we've got negative 4, and we're going to raise it to the second power, or negative 4 squared. A lot of students will just not even think about it, and they'll go right to their calculator and they'll type in negative 4 squared, enter. And the calculator is going to pump out negative 16. And there's an issue. All right, whenever you're putting a power into your calculator and it's negative, the base is negative, you have to put the base in parentheses. So in your calculator, it should look exactly as it's written right here. Right? Because what that's telling your calculator is negative 4 is going to be written twice. So we have negative 4 times negative 4. And we all know negative times a negative is a positive. So this is actually positive 16. Alright, so what I'm going to ask you guys to do is please don't rely on your calculator. Use the knowledge that you have and know that a negative times a negative is a positive. If I had negative 4 cubed, we know that that's going to tell us to write negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4. Well, how many negatives do we have there? There are 3. So a negative times a negative is a positive, and then a positive times a negative is going to give you a negative. So what's our answer? Our answer will be negative 64. Alright, so when thinking about it, whenever you have a negative base, alright, and you have a positive exponent, not positive, I've got positive on the brain, but I mean even, an even exponent. Your answer is going to be positive. And whenever you have a negative base, alright, and you have an odd exponent, you are always going to have a negative answer. So we have a positive answer here and a negative answer. So that's a nice little way to remember that. Alright, just a little trick. Last piece is I'm going to compare this back up to our number 1 where we have negative 4 squared. You might run into a problem that's negative 4 squared. And if you pump this into your calculator, we said it's going to give you the answer negative 16. Is that wrong? No, but what's happening is this negative is not in parentheses. It's not grouped like so, as it would be in number 1. Alright, we don't have those grouping symbols. So how do we evaluate this? Basically what's happening is we need to evaluate the 4 squared prior to applying the negative. So the 4, the base itself, is actually positive, and the negative is on the outside waiting to be applied last. So 4 times 4 is 16. So basically this is saying the opposite of 16, we know, is negative 16. So that is the big difference between number 1 and number 3. You really must pay attention to where the negative is placed, and also pay attention to your exponents. Alright, if you have an even exponent and the base is negative, you have a positive answer. Odd exponent with a negative base, you have a negative answer. So that's powers in a nutshell, evaluating powers. Let's jump down to order of operations. Order of operations is a basic part of evaluating a mathematical expression. A lot of students say, oh, I know all my order of operations, and that may be true, but you don't always follow them. All right, it's very, very important you understand order of operations and apply them properly, otherwise your answer will not always come out correct. So, the order of operations, a lot of people use the acronym PEMDAS, or they remember the little phrase, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Alright, I'm assuming you guys know that. Alright, so I'm just going to go with PEMDAS here. And instead of writing please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, we're just going to write out what each letter stands for. So P tells you to evaluate your parentheses first. E is your exponents. M is your multiplication. D is division. A is addition. S is subtraction. This is the basic order you want to evaluate an expression. So, but the big thing is some people will go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's not necessarily the case. There are only 4. All right, the first one is your parentheses. Second one is your exponents. The third one is multiplication and division together. You're not going to evaluate all multiplication, and once you're done, do division, because sometimes that's going to produce a false answer, be incorrect. When you have multiplication and division in one expression, you need to evaluate it from left to right. Alright, I'll throw the word evaluate up here too. Evaluate it from left to right. Alright, so say there's a division, and then a multiplication, and then a multiplication. You got to do that division first. And then lastly, number 4 is your addition and subtraction. They take the same rule as your multiplication and division. You're going to evaluate these from left to right in the order in which you see them. That is a common error that students will make. So remember, there are only actual 4 processes here in order of operations. So let's take a look at 2 problems. The first one is going to be 1/6 times the quantity, 6 plus 18, minus 2 squared. Alright, so order of operations tell us, well, let's look. Do we have any parentheses? We do. So we need to evaluate that first. So I've got 1/6, 6 plus 18, well, that's going to give us 24, minus 2 squared. So parentheses are still there, but there's nothing left to evaluate, so we're going to move on to the next piece, which are exponents. I see we have an exponent, and is this negative applied to the square? Is it part of the base? It's not, because it's not grouped in parentheses, as we see up here in number 1. It's more like number 3. So that negative is going to stay there when we evaluate it. So I'm going to have 1/6 times the quantity, 24, minus 4. It did not get applied. So now that we finished with the exponents, we're going to go on to multiplication and division. Well, I see a division problem with the fraction, but we're just going to multiply the fraction by 24. So 1/6 of 24, or basically you can think 24 divided by 6. Well, that's going to give you the answer of 4. And I'm going to drop down my minus 4 here. And well, we're done with number 3. We've done our multiplication. There is no division. Now we have to look to see if we have addition or subtraction. We have no addition, so we're going to go straight to subtraction. 4 minus 4, that's going to give us a final answer of 0. So 1/6 times the quantity, 6 plus 18 minus 2 squared, gives you 0. Let's take a look at a second problem. Alright, the second one, which we're going to look at, is 8 times the quantity 20 minus the quantity 9 minus 5 squared plus 3 squared. So what's interesting here is we basically have two sets of grouping symbols. We've got parentheses and brackets. Alright, when we have up here an order of operation parentheses, that's basically telling you it's a grouping symbol. Doesn't matter if it's an actual parenthesis or a bracket, they're the same. You have to assume they're the same. So you think to yourself, okay, I've got parentheses here. Now once you go into parentheses, you have to start your order of operations all over again. So I've got, inside my parentheses, I have to say, okay, do I have more parentheses? And I do. So this is my starting point. So I'm just going to do it one at a time. So I've got 8 times the quantity 20 minus, and 9 minus 5, that's going to give us 4 squared plus 3 squared. So I finished evaluating my parentheses within my parentheses. So now I'm going to go and look at my next order, which is exponents. And I see I have 2 of them. So I've got minus 4 squared, and notice this minus is on the outside, so it does not get applied when you square it. So the next simplification part is 8 times the quantity 20 minus 16 plus 9. Alright, now since we've done that, we're going to go to multiplication. Nope. Division. Nope. Addition, I see that there. Subtraction, I see as well. And if we remember, that's all part of the same process. The last process, addition and subtraction. I'm going to evaluate from left to right. So reading like a book, 20 minus 16, I have to do that first. So 20 minus 16 is going to give me 4. I'm going to drop down my plus 9. And now I see 8 times, well, 4 plus 9 is going to give me 13. So I finished my entire grouping symbol. The only thing left is a little bit of multiplication. So we get the answer 104. So that's order of operations. If you have any questions, please note them down and ask me in class. Alright, let's go to the third topic for today's lesson, which is evaluating algebraic expressions. Alright, so an algebraic expression, alright, or just an expression. The difference between an expression and an equation is an expression has no equal sign. Alright, no equal sign. We're not solving per se, we're evaluating. You solve when you have an equal sign. When there's no equal sign, we use the term evaluate. You should be familiar with this. It's basically plug and chug. So you're going to see the expression 3x squared plus 4x minus 5. So we have a little quadratic expression here. So we want to evaluate this when x equals -2. Again, it's just plug and chug. The first step we're going to do is we're going to substitute in a -2 for x. So whenever we see an x, we're going to replace it with a -2, and write the rest of the expression exactly the same. So we substitute -2 for x. Next, all you have to do is evaluate, alright, and this is where your order of operations comes in. Parentheses, is there anything to evaluate in your parentheses? There is not. Going down to exponents, we see there's an exponent. And notice the negative is inside the parentheses, so -2 squared is 4. Plus 4 times -2 minus 5. So all we did here was evaluate our exponent. Then we look and say, alright, do we have multiplication or division? I see multiplication here and here, so we need to work on multiplication. So we see 12 plus -8 minus 5. It's our multiplication. And then lastly, we are going to do our addition and our subtraction, which is our last step of order of operations. And we see 12 plus -8. Well, that's 4. And then bring down our -5. So basically we did our addition there. 4 minus 5 is -1. So we add, subtract from left to right. Alright, let's do one more of those and then we'll move on to simplifying by combining like terms. So problem number 2 is going to be 7x plus the quantity 2x minus 7 cubed when x equals 4. So the same process as before. Right, we're just going to substitute in 4 wherever we see an x. Everything else will be rewritten exactly the same. Now we want to start our evaluation. Alright, so I'm going to go through my order of operations. Do I have anything in my parentheses? I do. Alright, this parentheses is fine, nothing to do. Over here we have a couple steps. So I'm going to rewrite my 7 times 4 plus, remember your order of operations restarts once you re-enter a parentheses. So I'm going to look, and what do I have to do first? Oh, I've got some multiplication. So 8 minus 7 cubed. I still have a little bit more to do in my parentheses here. So I'm going to drop down the 7 times 4. 8 minus 7 we know is 1 cubed. Alright, simplified. All my parentheses are simplified. So now I'm going to go on to my exponents. I see 1 cubed. 1 times 1 times 1 still gives you 1. Alright, next is multiplication and division. All I see is multiplication here. 7 times 4 gives us 28. Drop down the plus 1. And 28 plus 1 is 29. Alright, substituting in the 4, and then order of operations from that point on. Alright, so that's order of operations. Next is simplifying by combining like terms. Alright, so here all we're going to do is we have a large expression and do as much simplification as we can, and we're going to end up with another expression. Alright, so this is going to be part of our properties, our order of operations, everything together in one clump. So the first problem is -6 times the quantity y minus 2 plus 4 times the quantity y minus 1. So if you're thinking order of operations, great, we do have parentheses. But once we have a variable in our parenthesis, alright, there may not be any simplification. And in this case, we can't simplify either of these. You can't combine y and -2. So y minus 2 stays the same, y minus 1 stays the same. So the first thing which we're going to do is work on our distributive property. So I'm going to take my -6, the negative goes with it, and that's going to be distributed to the first term, and it's going to be distributed to the second term, which is not just 2, it's negative 2. You have to take the sign. Then I'm going to take 4. All right, the positive goes with it. All right, so the 4 is positive. It's going to get distributed to the y, and it's going to get distributed to the negative 1. Remember, take that sign before the number. All right, once you do that, negative 6 times y is going to give you negative 6y. Negative 6 times negative 2, negative times the negative is a positive. So we've got plus 12. Now I'm going to move on to the second piece. Positive 4 times y is 4y. 4 times negative 1 is negative 4. Alright, so that's our distributive property. Next, we're going to group our like terms. So I see a negative 6y and a 4y. So I'm going to group those. And then I see 12 and a negative 4. So once you start grouping, always put a positive or an addition sign in between your grouping symbols. Alright, so I got one set of grouping symbols here, plus another set of grouping symbols, so 12 minus 4. And now I can start simplifying. Negative 6y plus 4y is going to give me negative 2y. 12 minus 4 is going to give me a positive 8. So my final answer here is negative 2y plus 8. Alright, let's do another. Number 2 is 8x plus 2y squared minus 3 times the quantity x plus y squared. So it's a little different than the first problem in the fact that we have multiple variables. We've got x's and we have y's, and our y's are squared. So, not a big deal. Alright, you just when you're grouping like terms, you have to group your x's with your x's and your y squareds with your y squareds. So, thinking, order of operations, is there anything I can do in my parentheses? Nope. Can I work with my exponents? This 2, alright, exponent of 2 only applies to the y, not to the 2. It would apply to the 2 if it was written this way. Alright, then we would apply to both spaces. But it's not rewritten that way, so the squared only applies to the y. In both cases, nothing we can do. So going on to the multiplication, and I see that here. It's our little distributive property, so that's where we will start with distribution. So I'm going to rewrite my 8x plus 2y squared. I'm going to distribute in my negative 3 to my x and to my y squared. So I'll have minus 3x minus 3y squared. And just like in the previous problem, we're going to group our like terms. So I see 8x minus 3x. I'm going to add that to 2y squared minus 3y squared. 8 minus 3, or 8x minus 3x, gives us 5x. 2y squared minus 3y squared. 2 minus 3 is negative 1, so I have minus y squared. If you write minus 1y squared, that's fine, alright, but it's not necessary. I tend to not write the coefficient when it's 1, so we're going to keep the answer 5x minus y squared. If you decide to write that 1 there, that's fine. No points will be taken off. Alright, so that's section 1.2. I'll see you guys at section 1.3.